Good morning. Let's see, it's July 27th, 8:15 a.m. I just stepped outside and got kind of geared up for the morning chorin. Sun is shining. Don't see any clouds in the blue sky. It's 57 degrees right now, so which is my sweet spot. Yeah, I got on my morning gear. I got my trusty leather gloves. I keep a pair of clippers of trimmers like you'd use to trim a branch or something, mostly to battle the blackberries. I have a knife with me at all times to cut open stuff, and I've got you. So here we're going. I'm starting this morning with what I call the walk, which is just some mornings I come out and I see how everything's doing. I look for problems to try to decide what I'm going to do today. Now, one of the ways I make this work is I work 4 10s. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, I work at the office from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then Mondays are my farming day. So I work here. Most days I do some work. Well, I either work at the office or I work on the farm for a couple hours, I would say. My usual is about 2 hours a day on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Sometimes I do more, sometimes I do less. It's really important that you, in trying to do an endeavor like this, that you take time to sit around and do nothing, and you take time to relax, take your lady friends out to dinner or whatever. Okay, so I just walked into the greenhouse. What I'm looking for is see if there's dry plants or if the watering is not working correctly. I've got behind the greenhouse here a build out that we actually built this year. So it is a high bench that I use to keep certain plants before I put them in the ground. I cleared a whole bunch of herbs out of the greenhouse a couple weeks ago, and they are here. Unfortunately, I brought them out here, and the next day it got really hot. It got up to 100, and so some of them dried out. But I don't really have place for them, so I'm watering them. All right, so today I wanted to do a little topical discussion. So right now in the United States, there are several issues going on that are semi-related. The first is there is an outbreak of a gut bacteria, or it's a parasite actually. It's cyclosporiasis. So it is linked to a farm in Mexico called Taylor Farms, I believe is the name. A great big food distributor in the United States. And it has been linked to iceberg lettuce. Now, the CDC has linked it to Taco Bell so far, but different news sources I was reading this morning, one had the number of victims in the outbreak. Now, when I say victims, for most people, what it will manifest is very watery, and sometimes they say explosive diarrhea. So it gives it's a intestinal thing, gives a gut reaction. And there's a cluster of, I believe, 9 states in the east where you're seeing a lot of outbreak, and then it's all over the United States. So Taco Bell pulled their shredded lettuce, but from what I'm reading this morning, there's people who have been sick who are reporting they never ate at Taco Bell, and there's some words being levied at the feds for not doing a good job of putting the word out, getting the understanding, letting people know what's happening, and for containing this outbreak. Because the other thing I read this morning is they're saying the outbreak is not contained. So normally what happens when there's a taint in the food supply is they'll track down the source, and then they'll they'll recall or stop shipping is the first thing of everything that's associated with that. And then the factories where the packaging or whatever is happening, the washing takes place, will get thoroughly clean and have to pass inspection and blah, 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 blah. Well, in the current, I don't know, I don't want to use too many politically loaded words, but under the current administration, at the beginning of the current president's administration, we saw Doge come into place, and there was a lot of quick um, gutting of departments. Now, one of the fundamental, I said the other day that we talked about too many things that are political that are actually philosophical or otherwise not about just political power. And one of those philosophical differences is the proper role of government. So those on the conservative side in the current iteration of politics um, tend to view government as sort of the enemy or bad, that we would be better off economically, or we'd have more freedom as people, or what, however you want to say it. Just checking out the chickens right here, seeing what they're doing. Sometimes I'll count them. I've got a broody hen. Let's see if she's still sitting on her box. And let's see if she's still. Okay, you're good. You're good. I'm just checking to make sure you're doing all right. Hens, when they get broody, will sit on their eggs. They have an instinct to nest or nurture those eggs up to little baby chickens. But chickens are so dumb that they'll sometimes starve themselves to death when they are sitting on the eggs because they just don't get up to eat. So sometimes you have to pay attention. I've had more than one hen die from being too broody. All right, checking out the sheep. They're kind of laying there in the barn chewing their cud. Hey, girls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Who's not here? Okay, I'm missing, or I'm not seeing a lamb. That's not good. So the attitude about government is that just government is bad. Oh, there you are. Hey, baby, what are you doing over there? He's a wether. He's actually a fella. Wether is a lamb or a goat that has been castrated. So they're not good for breeding purposes, but that also means they're going to be less aggressive and less stinky, in particular with goats. All right, chickens. It's a good time to give an update on chickens. If you're paying attention, I let the chickens out. So right now I'm looking in their run. I've set up the run for the little chicks so that I can see it when I walk by. So I don't have to get into the run to go in and inspect them. And it looks like they are mostly out. I came here the day after I let the chickens out, and I noticed that there were roosters in here, and most of the other hens had come in. Now their run is shaded, so the chickens will chase shade during the day. So they might have liked that. They might have been curious. I think that there's two possibilities. Either the little ones were all being bullied by the big ones, but as I thought about it, I think the roosters were here to protect the little ones from the big ones. But the little ones were all kind of huddled up into a corner. All right, so we're talking about a lot of things. Let's go back to our attitude about government, why this matters. So Doge, when cut tons of regulators, pulled people out of the field, cut money from different departments to do regulation, like USDA, FDA, EPA. A lot of these organizations help govern the corporations that provide us food and other things, and do inspections. Because what we've seen over the years is human beings have a tendency to cheat. So corporations can start cheating in ways that causes problems. So we have learned collectively that we need somebody to monitor um, um, our shared resources. There's sort of a philosophical idea, or I don't know whether to call it philosophical, called the tragedy of the commons, which is basically that oftentimes, and especially in the agrarian world, you'd have a village, and you would take your sheep or your cattle and you'd graze them up in the hills. And it wasn't really a concept that everybody owned, you know, 1,000 acres. Those were common lands. And so there are grazing practices covering the common lands. The tragedy of the commons is because nobody owns it. Nobody has direct, absolute responsibility for it, that it tends to be abused and neglected by everybody, and it will be ruined. It's one of the arguments for property ownership and capitalism, saying if you don't have somebody who owns that property, it will be collectively destroyed. Well, that problem surfaces in government actions, because if every corporation is to do what they want, the food supply now is so vast and so complicated, and things move around so much. The stretch of this outbreak, and even trying to track down where the lettuce or whatever that's coming from Taylor Farms. Now we don't know if their contamination is coming from where the lettuce was picked, where it was washed, or where it was shipped, or there's so many steps along the way to get your food to you that we the way we track that down is we have FDA agents who go out and inspect. But if we fire all the FDA agents, then there's nobody to do the job. It's interesting, working in government, and I've either worked in government or worked in the private sector servicing government my whole career. There's a lot of laws out there that are put in place that have no punishment for violating them and nobody to enforce them. So without that, if you don't put all three things in, you put a law and then you put the enforcement strategy and the penalties, then oftentimes people, especially powerful people, corporations that can hire tons of attorneys, can slow things down in the courts and make these battles last on for 10, 20 years. And by the time a settlement comes up, it kind of doesn't matter. It was a worthy investment for them to, from a monetary policy, to break the law, because they made more profits by breaking the law and paying the fine than they would have by obeying the law in the first place, if that makes sense. The real thing that got me kind of cranked up this morning, that makes me want to talk about it, is generally just the lack of understanding of what everybody does. I was listening to something, and somebody campaigning at some office somewhere was basically saying he's against taxes. And I thought on that for a while, and I thought, well, nobody likes to pay taxes, and nobody likes the idea that their money is wasted, that they're putting money. I can think about the fact that every tax dollar I paid my entire life, oftentimes at sacrifice of things that might have made my life marginally better or made things easier for me or my kids. It burned. We burned the first time they launched a Patriot missile or something like that. They burned up the total amount of money I paid in the first second and a half of firing the booster rockets. You can't really think about that stuff too much; it just piss you off. But anyway, this guy was against taxes, and I thought, how can you just be against taxes? Because taxes go to have the roads that we use to get to our homes, the sewer system we use to take our sewage away, the water lines, the power infrastructure, the internet infrastructure, the police and fire, and all this kind of stuff. And it's just complete irresponsibility to just say, hey, I don't want to pay taxes. If you don't want to pay taxes, you need to say, this is what I'm going to cut. So why am I ranting about this with the farm? Because our food supply in particular has become so vast and so complicated, and with the deregulation of the United States and the inevitable lack of regulatory authority when you're talking about a global system, and just the sheer scope of the global system, how much food is being moved around, even if we had our full contingency of inspectors, we don't have enough to keep the food supply safe. And this is what the system risks, and that we're encountering a more and more frequency. If we take something like the measles outbreak, the measles were thought to basically have been eradicated in the United States. But there's this problem that's related to the first problem I'm talking about, that Once that gets eradicated, people no longer understand why it was there in the first place. So you start neglecting the safety protocols. It's the difference between somebody, like, say, on a farm like this that's experienced and somebody who's novice. The experienced person does all these things to keep things running and to prevent like contamination of food. Somebody who's new, who doesn't understand that, won't do those things because it's just added cost and added expense. But if we do not have a robust, healthy regulatory system with the complexity of the food supply going globally, we are at huge risk that can't be mitigated. So one of the permaculture sort of ideas to mitigate this is get your food locally. Now, I'm not naive. um, the big players, like the Tyson Foods and Hormel and the big food producers, probably, I don't have the stats to back this up, but probably have a lower instance of things like, bacterial contamination and that than small producers. But because they're so large, the sheer number, meaning like if you get your milk, your pasteurized milk from a big dairy producer, there are instances where people get sick from that, but it's much less likely than if you buy from a small and local person. Just, we're talking raw statistical numbers. However, because they get so big, when a contamination event happens, the effect can be absolutely devastating. If there's more small local producers and one of them goes bad, the impact from their actions are much smaller on a population basis. So there's the paradox that by getting bigger and bigger and bigger, we might lower the percentage of people who say get sick from non-pasteurized milk, who get sick from it, to a smaller number. But the problem actually can be bigger. And when the system starts to break down, like we're seeing now, without the inspectors, without the ability of the government regulation to keep up, then it's likely that the problems start increasing geometrically, and you get to a point that it's much worse than if there were firewalls and breaks in the food system by getting local. So there's a lot of people right now who don't know if they can eat lettuce because you don't know. You walk into a restaurant, you don't know where that lettuce came from. You don't know if it's from contaminated farms. You don't know if it's been inspected by the FDA. You don't know if it's coming from a country that has so much corruption that the inspectors are just paid off. You just don't know. But if you buy your lettuce from a local farm, you can go down there and you can see what they're doing and you can talk to them. So I think generally speaking, that smaller, more localized probably induces more accountability and responsibility, but in a good way. But that accountability and responsibility becomes on the consumer, where if you just go buy everything at Walmart, you're like, well, big brother Walmart's going to take care of that. And there's a risk. And the risk is suddenly all the lettuce disappears because we're going to have that sort of reaction. So I don't know, just some thoughts on the big stuff. What I'm basically trying to say is, a lot of what we do in government in terms of food inspection and stuff is really useful and very good, and doesn't seem that way. Seems like an expense until we need it. But if we wait until we need it, it's too late. So that's why I can be on kind of both sides, saying, hey, we need regulation of the big industry. And wouldn't it be better for us to localize our food supply a little bit more, so we can make sure we're producing the things and not being in big washing factories where these sort of organic, what am I trying to say, pathogens or microbes or whatever can spread easily in a way that can impact thousands of people. All right. Well, right now I'm standing in the orchard. I was looking at the trees. I was looking at some dirt that I'm moving around. The things look good on the farm right now. We've been doing a lot of weeding this past week and just catching things up. And I was saying to Kimmy this morning, I think that right now we're more caught up on weeding than we've ever been since we've been here. And that's largely due to our local hero, Julie, who is our kind of gardener in chief. I can't remember if I talked about Julie. I told you when I recorded the first one, I recorded a big long 20-minute version, and then I lost it and I recorded a shorter version. So one of the ways we do this with Julie is she is a good friend of ours, and she used to work on community farm plots or garden plots in the city. And I sort of recruited her and said, "Hey, well, if you come out here, you can do whatever you want, and I'll buy all the seeds, and we have a little bit more room." At one of her complaints, and this is not just hers, about community farm plots is people get really enthusiastic in the spring, and then by this time in the summer, some of them have been abandoned. So you've got weeds that are getting out of control, and you don't really want to weed the plot of the person right next to you, but you also don't want them to, the stuff to spread into your stuff. So it becomes this push pull where here she has a little bit more control, which has given us benefit. In a future recording here, I want to talk about community and building community around these things and kind of things we've tried and failed at, and what my hope for that is. But the issue is we have more capacity to produce food than we have labor for. But I've had to spend money on the infrastructure. So there we are, where I have much more than I can take care of, and I need help, and that help in return can get what they want. So I'm investigating. We tried this a couple years ago. It didn't work really great, but having a CSA type arrangement, but with no money involved this spring. Now, a CSA, community support agriculture, I need to spend a time explaining all that if you haven't heard of it. But basically, what you do is you pay a farmer a set fee, and then every week you get a box of produce of whatever's coming out on the farm. So you're paying for access to fresh produce, but you don't really have a lot of say in what's coming. If they're giving you kohlrabi, you're going to get kohlrabi. So the idea, because I'm trying to find ways to do things outside the money supply, which is another whole discussion. But if I can find a way to say, hey, if you work an hour on the farm here, pulling weeds and helping plant things and doing that basic stuff, then we can do the same thing, that you can take produce. All right, I think that's enough rambling for this morning. A beautiful, beautiful day. I think next I'm putting a trellis in. I have an exit out of the big summer garden. I put one of the posts in a couple months ago, and I haven't been able to get back to it. I want to get that done this morning to top off this weekend. And yeah, it's a glorious time here today. So if you want to contact me, my email is john@johnlarson.org. I look forward to hearing from you, and please have a wonderful week.